Welcome back to the program. Dana Lash here with you. Joining me right now from Texas, my senator, John Cornyn, who has been the lead negotiator in perhaps one of the biggest moves on the Second Amendment or with regards to firearms since the 90s, I guess since the Brady Bill. And he has been leading the negotiations on that, which sound like they've kind of hit a snag. And I want to get into the details of it. But Senator, first off, thank you so much for joining me. And I'm looking forward to, a good discussion. And I love what you were saying there in that hearing with Kavanaugh. Do you still, obviously this might be rhetorical. You clearly still believe what you were explaining to Justice Kavanaugh back then in terms of making sure that someone has evidence and that someone can face their accusers. It is the due process that is a cornerstone of our republic. Yes.
Absolutely. That's non-negotiable, Dana. I believe it is a constitutional requirement, and we are dealing with a constitutional right here, the Second Amendment.
You said that there were some of the ideas that were rejected in negotiations, and you had posted this just a couple of days ago. The universal background checks, which is you would have to establish a registry, as you understand, to do that. The assault weapons ban, that's something that a lot on the left wanted. That is not included in the negotiations. No ban on magazine restrictions, no ban on waiting period. The one thing, though, that seems... and you had tweeted about this, I'm pulling your tweet up now, that seems to be the issue is that there are some details that you're not able to come to an agreement on. Give us some of those details that you guys seem to be at an impasse.
Well, as you know, 19 states have red flag laws, and obviously due process is critical in each of those, but these are state laws, not federal laws. And one of the things that I insisted upon is there will be no national red flag law. Some of my colleagues wanted to provide financial assistance to law enforcement to administer the programs in their state. And right now what we are discussing is that for states that did not pass the red flag law, we want to make sure that funding is available to assist any sort of crisis intervention programs that they have in their state. But here's the kicker. It has to be consistent with the due process as laid out in the Constitution, as interpreted by the federal courts, including the Supreme Court, for you to be eligible for that.
Right.
But we're still working our way through that, but that's where I am.
It's not coming from D.C. It's not a federal mandate, because I would imagine that would violate the whole Pritz v. United States thing, which is what the gun control lobby was running up against back in the 90s when they were trying to have this federal program pushed onto the states to administer and fund. But it still is, if we are incentivizing that states adopt this, for all intents and purposes, it is still kind of a de facto national approach, is it not?
Well, I'm glad you asked the question about incentivizing. I think it's inappropriate for the United States Congress to incentivize any state to pass legislation that that the federal government wants it to do. If the federal government wants to pass a law that applies to all the states, it can do that. But here, that's not even being considered. So we're not incentivizing states that don't have red flag laws to pass them. Again, I think that's inappropriate. What we're saying is 19 states will receive some financial assistance from the law enforcement grant program. It's a formula that's used routinely now for law enforcement. If they have a red flag program and it complies with due process, then it's eligible to receive financial assistance. But in addition, states like Arizona, states like Texas, that don't have red flag laws, but do have things like mental health courts, veterans courts. They have assisted outpatient treatment programs to help people maintain their compliance with their medication if they're managing their mental illness. Those sorts of things would have access to the same financial assistance.
So it sounds to me as though that if there is that you're pushing for any kind of federal funds, if there is a program or something even within the existing legal framework that is in place that would
right.
deal with this situation, because that was going into one of my other questions. When I first heard that, well, I think it was like one of the first points when I saw the framework that came out on Sunday. And it kind of made me think of Senator Graham's bill that he was retooling with Richard Blumenthal. And I was wondering, is there some sort of like prerequisite that states must meet? Because I know that there's a lot of discussion about due process, but in some states that have red flag laws, I mean, they don't even have to really. The evidentiary standards are all over the place. Clear and convincing isn't required in some. In some states, only police can be petitioners. In other states, it can be kind of anybody. And usually, always, the penalty or confiscation is first, and then 2 weeks, which goes way beyond the 24 to 72 hours before the time period that someone should be arraigned, and that's been considered to be unconstitutional, to have someone wait longer than 72 hours to get before a judge. I mean, they say 14 days, but some states have an average of 3 months. How is that considered due process? Because it seems like it upends the process.
Yeah, I think, part of, to your point earlier, limiting the number of people who can ask for these emergency orders to police. I mean, one of the concerns that I know we all have is that some disgruntled, boyfriend or girlfriend or ex-spouse complaint, we would have stiff penalties I support stiff penalties to punish people who might abuse this authority. But we're going to be as explicit as we can using the English language that the money that's going to be available is only for those states that have due process built into their program. I'm a recovering judge and lawyer, and I understand how important that is, and I'm also a proud gun owner, and I don't want people circumventing due process, not having the notice, an opportunity to be heard, cross-examination of witnesses, right to counsel. All those things are important to making processes available.
Are the Republicans with whom you're negotiating, and I was saying yesterday that I think 4 of them are retiring, and I think I misspoke yesterday because I meant to say you weren't up for re-election. I know Senator Blunt's retiring. You're not up for re-election. Are there any one of the 10? I mean, is that something that Republicans are finding contention with amongst themselves, the things that you just mentioned, providing, a court-appointed attorney? Because from what I've seen, not all the states do that. And most of the states, you have to bear the legal expense. And, for someone to be falsely accused, when the investigation happens after, it just seems that the whole structure is set up for abuse. Are there some Republicans that are you all kind of one mind on that, or is there contention in the ranks with that?
No, I think there's a lot of concern about this issue, and I'm concerned about it too. There's a lot of proposals out there that will not find their way into the final product. But that's really one of the two issues that we have to resolve satisfactorily. Again, we're not incentivizing or forcing states that don't have red flag laws, and we're going to be sure that this, as you know, the federal government routinely has a grant program, something called Burn JAG, through the Justice Department that funds things like trying to eliminate the rape kit backlog and just a host of other support for law enforcement related issues. That's how this would be administered, and it would be strictly limited in terms of who can gain access to it based on a requirement that they comply with the Constitution.
Right. What within we're talking with Senator John Cornyn of Texas, who is the lead negotiator on this package, this gun control package that is currently being debated and drafted right now in the Senate. They don't have the legislative text yet, but they do have the framework. What in, Senator, our existing legal framework is lacking to where we would need something like a red flag law, where we do have this kind of establishment of guilt until innocence is proven in a court of law? What in our legal framework is making this to where this is a necessity?
Well, of course, Dana, I think guilt, you have to prove your innocence. That violates the fundamental constitutional right. You're innocent until proven guilty. That's the importance of having due process.
Right.
But most of the focus here
Which red
is
flag
on people who already, if they were an adult, would be disqualified. People with mental health adjudications,
Right.
people with criminal background records. The focus is trying to make sure that those people are barred from accessing firearms, and as they are under current law. But part of the problem here is we don't have insight into some of the juvenile records, including adjudications, because they're not part of the National Instant Criminal Background Check system. Here, Salvador Ramos walked in and bought a firearm. He passed a background check, even though everybody knew he was a ticking time bomb. So trying to figure out how to identify that narrow group of people between the age of 18 and 20 by giving the FBI an ability to do an enhanced review in order to identify these people who would otherwise be disqualified were they adults. That's part of that. That's what that's all
And
about.
that's an interesting proposal. And I saw that you had mentioned that earlier, because some of it, either we're dealing with a problem where, like with Sutherland Springs, we just didn't have a guy's record reported. I mean, there's a problem with states even reporting stuff
Right.
to the three, the National Crime Information Center, and there's two other places that NICS pulls from when they fill out that 4473. So for this, I mean, how narrowly, Senator, is this going to be written? I mean, there's dumb things that kids do and even dumb misdemeanors. And then, there's the stuff like what we saw with the Uvalde killer, putting cats in a bag and beating them on the ground and, taking video of yourself doing it. I mean, that's cruelty. That's a felony, actually. I mean, that seems to me that was actionable without any kind of red flag or anything else process. But how narrowly is this going to be written? Because there's a lot of concern about making sure that stupid stuff kids do. There was a case in Florida where a teenager said dumb stuff online, and he had a red flag order put on him in this ex parte process. So what protections are going to exist in that? How narrowly will that be written? And is there going to be, is it going to be limited to just violent criminal felonies?
Yes, we're trying to right now come up with as narrow as possible a provision that this would apply to. And we negotiated, and I basically said, we're not going to have any waiting periods here. As you know, under current law, the NICS check can go up to 3 days. But if you pass the check in 30 minutes, you get your firearm. And if there is a reason to, let's say, investigate a misdemeanor drug offense like Dylan Roof had in Charlotte that was not part of the background check system, if there's a way to follow up on, let's say, an assault conviction, and you find out on further inquiry it was for domestic violence, which would be a disqualifier, that's the intent of what we're trying to do here. Again, not for everybody, just for the narrow age band. Many people wanted to raise the age to purchase a firearm, a long gun, to 21, and we said we're not doing that.
I'm glad for that.
If it's a matter of getting information into the background check system, then that's something we ought to consider.
Now, I will say with the Dylan Roof case in South Carolina, talking with Senator John Cornyn, that was a case where it should have been. I mean, technically it was in the background check system. However, James Comey, when the FBI released a statement on that, said it was a clerical error because apparently the person who was filing all the paperwork didn't understand the geography of two similarly named areas where this guy came from. So the system is only really as good as the people operating it, which is why people have concerns. Are we going to be creating a whole other system that's going to have the same kind of, false positive results that NICS has had so far?
No, we're not creating a new system at all. As you pointed out, after Sutherland Springs, we passed the fixed NICS law, which was focused on making sure that people like the shooter there's felony convictions were in the background check system. Since that date, in 2018, 11.5 million records have been uploaded into the NICS system. I think the NICS system works well, but it only works as well as the information in it. So that's where we're trying to focus, not on creating a new system, but trying to make the NICS system is populated with information that if it occurred as a juvenile, and if that information is available, that's the sort of thing that if you were an adult would prohibit you from purchasing a firearm under current law. That's the intent of what we're trying to do.
Right. I want to go back talking with Senator John Cornyn just for the red flag issue for one moment, because it's this. And, of course, I think there was a lot of, we're just waiting. We know what we know and we know what we don't about the details of the framework with the 18 to 21-year-olds. But I made the point, the other day, Congresswoman Kathleen Wright, she's a sitting lawmaker from New York. She, and I'm just using myself as an example, had called me a domestic terror threat before. What assurances do I have and other people have that lawmakers won't abuse their power? And, because it still, to me, seems like a diminishment of due process, the red flag proposal, even if it's state by state and not national. It is what it is. But what assurances do we have? We've watched parents be called domestic terrorists, and the DOJ, working with Democrats and the National School Board Association, they were actually wanting to use their authority to investigate these parents. We saw the IRS go after the Tea Party back in 2009, 2010. We've seen a lot of abuse of government authority just in the past 15 years, Senator, and that makes a lot of people very hesitant to get on board with anything that renders a penalty and confiscates people's firearms, before they're even able to address the judge, because these are ex parte orders. So most of the time, people don't even know what's happening. What assurances can you give us that this would never happen, since we're apparently undoing our framework?
Well, Dana, you're exactly right. We've seen repeated examples of the government abusing its authority, and you mentioned a few of them. The best thing we can do, I think, from the legislative branch is try to be very specific and clear about what we are trying to do here, and so it leaves very little room for interpretation by the courts. And again, I think some of these states have passed red flag laws that I think are very deficient in due process. We're going to try to make clear that what we are trying to do here to provide law enforcement assistance cannot be interpreted as allowing anything less than a robust due process review of a constitutional right. That's what the Democrats and the left forgets. We're talking about a constitutional right, and I take that very seriously.
Senator Cornyn, John Cornyn from Texas, I appreciate your time with us, and please keep us updated on the progress of this. And I'll say this because I know I've heard from a lot of listeners. We're coming up on Independence Day. Please, our prayer is that you and our other senators do not limit our rights, ironically, so close to Independence Day. And please fight for due process, and please fight to uphold the Second Amendment. And we're going to be watching how these negotiations go. I appreciate your time, Senator. Thank you.